I'll let them work on that. I'm Judy Evans. I am the council president for starting in January. And as you all know, we're going through this process of trying to get ourselves ready to get a call letter or an MSP out to the synod so that we can get a new pastor. And we're really pushing the time frame. We started this really right after Pastor Tim resigned. This is the first step, and we have several more we'll talk about later. And our goal is to have our MSP, our ministry site profile, which is a letter that says who we are, to have that in the synod office by the beginning of summer. So it's a brief time period. We really pushed it together so that we can get right out there, because we do want to be competitive and find the best person to fill our vacancy here. So today what we're going to talk about, of course, is the CAT results. That was the survey, the congregational assessment tool that 122 of you filled out over January. We did it in January, we closed it at the end of January. And so, the CAT, we all said, there was comments about, well, we did this 5 years ago, why should we do it again? Well, the interesting thing, it has changed. We're different people now, and we'll see some of that as we go through. I mean, for one thing, we're older, but that's not exactly a surprise when we look around us, but there is definitely, the percentage of people over 65 in our congregation has really increased significantly. We haven't changed much. We're still probably, we're in the top percentile still of people of how far we drive to get to church. That certainly, you know that as well as anybody else, because we are the ones that do that. But as we go through this, we'll find places that we have changed our culture. We've changed how we feel about things. And that's one of the first pieces that this survey does. Aha. Thank you. The transition team has done an amazing job of getting this all together. The CAT survey went out first part of January. We got the results back. About 10 days ago on a Zoom meeting, we sat with Steve Wilco, who's from the synod office, and is a trained interpreter of the CAT. And we met with him, council members, transition team members, some of the people who had already been recruited to the call committee, and a 2-hour presentation going through in quite detail what our results showed. It was after that time, about 2 days after that the transition team met in the back room there after church and put together the summary that you're going to see today. And they put together, and I must say, by Sunday night, what you're going to see, had been put together. Now, they did an amazing job. I would like them to stand up so that we can acknowledge all the work they've been doing. As well as all the work we will have them be doing for the next couple months. It was Adrian who really put the slideshow together. It's been a wonderful job. So those are our transition teams members. What they put in this is what they thought from hearing the presentation, they thought were the most important pieces of what this was all about. And there are other pieces that we will not get to today that we will continue to refer to and get back to and do some work on, because there just isn't enough time to do the whole thing. So please, if you have any questions at any time, please stop me and ask. People at home, no, you can't, it's just being streamed, so you can't do that. But please, any questions you have, please let me know. So, excellent. Okay, we had 122 total responses. 79% of the ones went out, so about 140 went out. which, for any of you who've done survey research, a 79% response rate is quite remarkable. Usually it's significantly less than that. Some of the major national surveys, they're happy if they get 4%. So this was a very high response that everybody did notice. So we thank you all for all that work you've done. When they get the results, what the Synod can do, the people that analyze it, they can compare these results that are right now in 2022 with what we said in 2016, as also they can compare to other churches who are also completing this survey. And they have a database of thousands and thousands of Protestant churches, a lot Lutheran and Episcopal, who have also completed this particular survey, so that those are data that we can, they compare us to. So, I personally think the ones that are more important to me, I think, are how we compare to ourselves 6 years ago. Not that it isn't important to look at other churches, but to me what was most interesting is how we compare to ourselves. So from the beginning, one of the first things that they respond to is just that overall satisfaction. How do people like it here? How are you feeling at the place? And this is sort of interesting. Remember, these are our responses. I filled it out. Many of you filled it out. And what was noticeable, what was mentioned to us, is that we have about 35% of people who are clearly satisfied. But we have 50% who are on the fence. The people that are like, either way, we might disagree, we might agree, but we're not sold on it. We're not totally miserable. But we're definitely not in the, I clearly agree, I'm satisfied with this. The good news in this, from what was pointed out, is that we can work, this is a challenge for us. We can work on this one. And if people are, somewhat, they're not sure, we can certainly work to turn that around. Yes, sir.
I'm Mark Edwards from Mass and all. I wasn't going to say anything until you said you were comparing it to 6 years ago. I think the one thing you have to keep in mind with this survey, and I wrote to them about it at the time, is that it was taken at the end of COVID, and many of us had not been in church for 2 years because of COVID.
Yeah.
And I certainly was not satisfied with that arrangement. And so I just think we need to be, we have to make some compensation for the fact that a lot of these results, if you answered honestly, does not necessarily reflect what you thought about church if you had been able to be here and you hadn't had COVID and the pandemic and all. So I think that tempers some of this.
I agree. Thank you, Mark. And I personally very much agree with that. Nobody liked COVID. I mean, it was really, it really changed all our lives in some way. I mean, nobody went through those 2 years without having some change, pretty profound, in how we saw things and how we did things. Interesting enough, that was asked, I think it was Tom who raised it at the, when we did the Zoom meeting with Steve Wilco, and he did say that since COVID, they've looked at that in places, churches that have done this since COVID. That can't be very many. I mean, that's because we're still in it. I mean, we haven't gotten past it. And he said that they found that hadn't been a factor. I disagree with that, and I agree with you, Mark, completely. I mean, I think a lot of these things, we need to think about that and not beat ourselves up about that. And I think the difference now, I mean, I look around when there are 100 people or so at a worship service, participating, I think, enthusiastically. And I don't know how many people are at home. That's different than it was in January, when we were just sort of like, oh, here we are, and the service was clearly not as rich as it has become. And one of the things that comes out in this is that that is something that is at the top of our list in terms of importance. You know, what our worship service is like. Is it spiritual? Is it uplifting? Does it guide us? So of all things, that's one of our drivers of our satisfaction. But for 2 years, it clearly wasn't the same. So I agree with that. In fact, it is for us, the high quality and spiritual worship was our #1 driver in what our satisfaction is. That's what we consider most important in our lives. Secondly, there were others, that caring for others with special needs, that our leaders represent the management, the membership, sorry, and that the pastor brings out the best in everyone, and that the pastor engages with a message that enriches our lives. So we have definitely in that top 5, what drives us is the fact that we value very much spiritual, engaging worship. And that theme comes through again and again. So, okay. Oh, thank you. Energy, that's the next piece that they look at. What is the energy level in our congregation? And again, I think that, in addition to satisfaction, needs to be tempered with what Mark brought up, in that, you know, I didn't feel very energetic during COVID. I mean, how was it, you know, for those of us that weren't working? I was home all day in, you know, sweatpants and didn't talk to many people except on the phone. So your energy level clearly was just down. So I think that also has to be tempered with that. And again, we have people on the fence. Are we just going through the motions of church? Well, you know, in some ways we were during COVID. It was just hard to not feel that way. So again, I don't think we can beat up on ourselves. So how do we improve the energy level? Well, it's excellent worship experience. That's another thing that we have said again and again. So we want excellent worship service. And we also want a friendly atmosphere. That we rated as very important for our energy level. And interestingly enough, our perception of our hospitality was really low, which is kind of an odd thing to me, but again, I have to temper it with some COVID cases. And I know last time it was as well. And that was one of the things that the transition team held some workshops on hospitality. And we really tried to improve that. So it's just one of our things to keep in mind for the future, how we want to address that piece of it. Any questions about that? Any thoughts? We're going to start with name tags, actually. This is an example of one. Permanent name tags that we'll put in your mailboxes. And we're going to work on that so it's easy for us to identify each other. One first little piece of dealing with that one. Okay. Okay. The next thing they looked at is value of activity beyond worship. Now that's interesting, something that we felt good about, better about. And it was similar to what was last time as well, in 2016. It wasn't terribly changed. That many people agree that participation in church activities is important to us. So, okay, we'll move on. This is who we are. This is probably, in some ways, to me, the very interesting part of it. I don't know how many of you were here. In 2017, I think by the time we had the results of the CAT and presented it. I think Dave presented the CAT findings from the last transition team. The Holy Cow company that are the people that have designed this instrument They divide us up into 4 quadrants based on a theologically progressive, a continuum from theologically progressive to theologically conservative. And the words progressive and conservative, they're trying to change, they don't know what to change it to, because those words are kind of lightning rods in our society today. But so at some point they will hopefully figure out what that means. But theologically, if you put theologically in front of that, it sort of explains it a bit. And on the other axis, how adaptive versus how settled you are. And the characteristics of those 4 quadrants are in that, are up on that board. I don't think, we don't have to, I guess they're printing the thing, okay. That less, I'll say the Magi, that tends to be the more intellectual group of people, very seeking about knowledge, information, that they do appreciate a deep knowledge of their faith. At their worst, they can be aloof and somewhat distant and a little bit unapproachable. So that's in the yellow box. In the blue box, they call paracletes. And those are the people that are warm, compassionate, mentoring, healing, but they can be overly emotional, overwhelmed, naive, and stuck in their routine. On the top right-hand corner, sort of gray, are the people that are the performance. That's the performance people. They're fun, loving, lively, spontaneous, new life. Often some of the that we see. And they can be irresponsible, flaky, unpredictable. So we're not there. We're definitely not there. The bottom corner, bottom right, is the hearth and home. People are stable, secure, dependable, clear, and at the worst they can be rigid, controlling, system-bound, and conflict-prone. And we're not there either. So, where we came out this time, okay, is in 2016, we were in that paraclete box. In 2022, we're up in the Magi group, which is an interesting change. Of course, survey data doesn't give you any reason for why. I mean, we don't know. I can't say, well, because of that, we did this because of that. But it definitely, it's a difference. So we are considered to be the rational, we want a rational integrity of our faith. We want a just application of faith to life. We're on a journey of understanding, intellectual curiosity. And we appreciate the wandering aspect of faith. And interestingly enough, in the write-up, they use wandering both in the figurative sense as well as in a literal sense. And of course, we have wandered, to Guatemala, and we've wandered to Africa in that sense. So in their literal sense, and they mention the literal sense, and that is an example, and then figuratively, wandering on our faith journey. So that is who we are now. Does that surprise anybody, or? You will all have these to take home with you, and yeah.
I don't have a bulletin in front of me, so I don't have the statement that I just read this morning that I should, right? But that's what it says, is that we welcome everybody sort of wherever they are on their faith journey.
Correct. Correct. Actually, quite often during today's service, I get it because I was thinking about this presentation and what we were doing. I kept pulling out pieces that sort of fit in what we're talking about in that way. So, but this is where we are now. And I guess from that, I mean, the danger, as I say, that we can be perceived as being aloof and somewhat intellectual, and it's one of those things that we might want to think about, you know, in the future of how we go ahead with this, how we move ahead. One of the questions that, the number of questions that they ask in this survey that many of you took, what comes out frequently is that we are very clergy focused. They have three categories of how they put churches in categories. Clergy focused is one, power focused is one, and another one is ministry focused. And interestingly enough, in the 2016 taking of this particular survey, we were power focused. And now we are clergy focused. And that's good and bad. One of the things that in a clergy focused, you know, we tend to, a lot of our answers are, the pastor does this for us. The pastor focuses on, you know, planning this kind of a thing. So, but their comment is that it's a good journey from the power to clergy focus, moving more toward a ministry focus. And even the fact that they suggested that in places where we say, and some of the examples on the questionnaire, does the pastor provide for this? Does our congregation provide for this? So that sort of just making that gradual transition from being pastor focused, clergy focused, to being ministry focused would make a difference in what we're doing. And one of the, yes?
Judy, I would like to just make a comment
Please do.
about that. I think this is another area where COVID had a dramatic effect on the results, because the reality is during COVID, we had a diminished worship experience where the pastor was the center of everything. I mean, because we were interested in everybody's health and safety, it basically was watching the pastor lead a service, whether it was online or in a small in-person gathering. And I will tell you, as somebody who has served a lot of different churches, another Lutheran congregation and many Episcopal congregations, my experience of you is that you are not especially clergy focused. In fact, I have been struck by the extent to which the lay people in the church share the ministry and lead the ministry of the congregation. And so I have every hope and expectation that as we sort of emerge out of this pandemic, you will become less clergy focused naturally, and you will move into a space where the various ministries of the church are more shared. So I wouldn't be too alarmed at that particular result, I guess.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. Yeah.
Is there some way you can explain what power focused is and what is going to keep us from going backwards instead of forwards?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I can answer that well. Because one of the things, I looked at the results from the last time and couldn't find that clearly spelled out, and I think that's an excellent point. And this time, since we're not there, they didn't send us any of that, so I could not find some of those data. I don't know, if David's looking at the one from last year? Can you find it there? Yeah. So that's something that I think we will, I've asked the people to.
I was just going to say that just could be a change. That the clergy focus, power focus, ministry focus, that could also be a change in their wording.
Correct.
And so therefore, we wouldn't have that from
Right.
5, 6 years ago because they didn't have it 5 or
Right.
6 years ago.
That is, in fact, I've asked people just to write, some of the team to write some notes so that we can refer these questions, like yours, Jackie, to the Synod, who interpreted it, and find out what they meant by that. So we will, thank you. We'll follow up on that.
You know,
Linda?
I was just going to say, my recalling the power focus was more that the power lay in the lay leadership, in the kind of leadership management system of the church. But I think it's still worth a question of synod, but that's where my memory recalls.
Right, right. I know one of the things that there are a number of questions on the survey relate to that the leadership in the church reflects the makeup of the congregation. And it's not vested in a few people. And I think that gets to what your commenter, Linda, that, there has been concern that it was, that power was vested in a few people making decisions. And that may be the crux of what we need to think about for the future. I mean, I think for one thing, we were very thoughtful, as thoughtful as we could be, putting the transition team together to look for people as diverse as we could. Now, we're not very diverse people, but we're diverse a little bit in age, although we are a very older congregation. But we certainly had Audrey, with a number of people who are younger on the team, people that haven't done too much else maybe, or people who've done a lot. So we tried to get as diverse a team as we could to represent the congregation on the transition team. So, and that may be, but we will follow up on it, because I think that's important. Anything else about that? Let's see. Where we're going. Okay. So one of the things of course, they ask us is, what do we want in our new pastor? These two things, let me find that. Spiritual leaders and pastoral care. That is probably, spiritual. Lead us, unite us, empower members for lay leadership positions, and pastoral care. Those two things came out on so many different indices as being our very important things. That we want a high spiritual worship experience. We want to make sure we provide pastoral care for people in need. And again, the one thing that, it was hard during COVID. We called people, on the telephone, but it was, obviously we were restricted, but we did try that. In the list of things that we want in somebody, the preaching is number one. And from my recollection, that has always been, each time we've done through this, that has been our number one focus. Number two was strategic leadership and being a visionary. Number three was pastoral care. That we want to make sure that we provide for pastoral care. Number four was teaching and training. Number five was somebody to deal with change management. And six, someone to resolve, negotiate conflict. Somebody who is good at administration, and someone who could be a community catalyst. Now, that's probably in some ways what every church wants. It's not terribly unique to us. We want somebody who is a spiritual leader. We want somebody who provides, make sure that we have, strategic planning for the future. So that's where we are. And our priorities, that's the other thing, and that's linked very closely with what we want in our new pastor. Yes?
Well, I don't know if you're going to go to this, but you moved away from the pastor. The thing that really struck me in the presentation was as we transition kind of into this Magi Square, I mean, one of the downsides of that is the potential for being a little cold or unfeeling and whatever. And one way to balance that nicely is to look for a pastor who has some of the qualities, I guess, in the Paraclete area, a little bit more sensitive and feeling and a little more touchy-feely, I guess. And I mean, that just hit me as making a lot of sense.
Right, yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think if many of you have served on call committees, or you've also done interviewing in your work position, and it's hard. It's not an easy task to get people, to find the right fit for person. But those are things that are really good to keep in mind. Anything else about that? Okay. I'm just going to, our priorities. Now, our priorities. Make the necessary changes to attract families with children and youth to our church. And every church says that. And then develop and implement a comprehensive strategy to reach new people and incorporate them into the life of the church. And every church says that too. And then the third one, provide more opportunities for Christian education and spiritual formation at every age and stage of life. Ken? Ken, do you want to?
Sorry.
Do we know how this ranked the last time before Pastor Tim came?
Steve?
Oh, just the reason I...
Yeah. Right.
So the reason I ask is because when Pastor Tim came, he made it clear that he was not here to grow the church. He said that when he came.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
That's all.
Good point. Yes, that is true. But these are, I think they were just about the same. So, number 1 and 2, the growth priority is shared by nearly every congregation. So then the next suggested priorities give us some way of looking at what we might want to focus on. Provide more opportunities for Christian education and spiritual formation at every age and stage of life. That was a suggested priority. And we're averaging how. It's how we rate to other churches. And again, going way back to Mark's point at the beginning, during COVID, we did something. There were some things online that we did in Zoom, but, I'm glad Zoom is there, but it certainly is not a preferred medium for discussion or, interaction. So, I can see us getting, as we're now becoming more open, so to speak, I can see us getting back into more of this, and figuring out new ways to provide some spiritual growth at all ages and stages of life. And I think we have to explore possibilities of how we can do that. for our children and for our adults. Secondly, strengthen the process by which members are called and equipped for ministry and leadership. Same process. I can see as we move forward that this is something that we can be creative about and see how we can do that. Now that we're back together, meeting together in person. And third, to deepen our sense of connection to God and one another through stronger worship services. And I do think, not to put him on the spot, but since Pastor Luther's been here, we've seen such an increase in attendance as we've brought back the aspects of worship that we all so value. And I don't see any reason for that to get worse. I can see it getting better. Strengthen the pastoral response of the church in serving people with special needs. And that's one of the things that comes through, for us and for many other churches as well, that, providing, and we have our Caring Connections at church, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to expand that, to work with people and get more people involved in it. And as I said, again, during COVID, it was limited. But I can see us expanding that again. So, thoughts about those things? As we move forward with what we're doing, we'll be calling on people to help us. So, and to figure out how we can do some of this education. I know Myers and Beck would love to do Sunday school. We know it's not going to look like it did before, but we do need some way to provide a better focus on Christian education for our kids, very definitely. And adult forums, we used to have, I miss those. So these are really positive things we can work together to do. Continue with our ministries and community outreach. We have lots of opportunities to do this. So, our next steps. Our next steps, we have on Sunday, May 1st, we're going to have a shorter service, probably a service of the word or something similar to that, I believe. And Pastor Luther will be leading us in a workshop that's entitled Why Us? And this is something that is new. This was not here the last time. And I believe, from my perspective, I think it was added in order to get to this point and we say, okay, well, so what? What does this data all tell us? And how can we move forward with that? Who we are. So he is going to be leading that. And then on Sunday, May 22nd, we will be gathering to have a workshop to actually work on the wording, keeping in mind what we've just talked about, keeping in mind what will come out of the May 1st workshop, and we'll be writing the ministry site profile. And that will be then, there are some people who will further write the words, but we'll be talking about how that gets framed. And then some of the people, Linda and Dot and Eileen, will be actually working, putting the words on that. I think Mark Beliveau also. And that we want to get to the Synod office by end of June, or early June if we can. That's a little early, maybe end of June. And then from there, and we have a call committee that we're working on putting together. Some of you have already been approached and have agreed. And the call committee will be ready to invite candidates after they review CVs and things to come and meet with us. They will meet with them, they will go to their church, they will bring people back here if there's a good fit. So, questions about that? Yes. Yes. Jessica.
you've all been asked to fill out those 3 questions. Why do you come? What keeps you coming? What do you want to see in the future? The 3 questions that were either post out on the board, on the whiteboard, or hand by hand or online. Those are really essential for us so that we can successfully complete the Why Us forum. That's what those are so essential for. And I just want to thank everybody who have completed them and explain that those questions are what are going to lead us in the adult forum on the 1st.
Kind of jumping back a little, Judy, but on one of the slides that said, you know, how our ministry or our church would like to grow, and please, transition committee, correct me if I'm not saying this like I heard it, is that our level of flexibility as a congregation on a continuum is perhaps on the, 0 to 100, it's on a little below 50, it's on the lower end. And again, that could be because of COVID. Everything shrank a bit, and we probably had to exercise our brain and heart muscle even more in isolation. But it's something I think just a quality of our congregation to think of in terms of how do we expand our flexibility in all these different areas too.
Correct. Thank you. Good question. And I think, there are some questions in there that say that we welcome new opportunities for worship, and we don't always welcome them. But we'll tolerate them sometimes. So you're right. I think we need to think about that and expanding how we see that. And as we invite other people, as other people join us who may not think the same way, how do we tolerate that? How do we make allowances for that? Eileen.
I just wanted people to know that there were 53 responses to those 3 questions. Yep. I collated the responses and emailed them to Dan about 2 days ago.
While we're waiting for that, I didn't say before, Dan has assumed the chair of this group, Dan Scammon, and he could not be here today due to prior arrangements that he had.
First, I appreciate all the work that you and everyone else is doing on this, and it's not an easy thing to do. And it's important to understand what we feel and perhaps why we feel what we do and what our experiences are. But I would urge you also to consult the literature on what's happening to religion and Christianity in this country generally. Yeah. We are in the least church state in the Union. We compete with Vermont on that one. And that young families are not going to church anywhere. Even the evangelical congregations are in decline. And so I think it's important when we think about our plans to be realistic about what is possible and what would be wonderful but is likely impossible.
I've been carrying the mic around. I'm going to speak this time. Supporting what you said about the effect of COVID. If we really compare ourselves honestly to other congregations, and I talk to other congregations and other people, not formally, but to friends at different churches and also my family. My mother belongs to a Lutheran church in Indiana. They're still doing Common Cup, and which sounds crazy, but they are. But the point is that we carefully erred on the side of caution as we relate to COVID. There's still a lot of folks here wearing masks today. I'm not. But I think that we really went the extra step to be safe during COVID. And maybe that's more reflected than other congregations in this survey. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we did. I mean, we were very cautious.
Being the liaison to the transition team, I sat through the presentation, and one of the things they drove home was, if you looked at all the different slides, you saw that we would have 50% or 45% or 60 quote, on the fence. On the fence is not a bad thing. So think about your own personal experiences. You may like, if there's 10 things we're talking about, you may like 8 out of 10, but that puts you on the fence. Doesn't mean you're unhappy. So you have to keep that in the back of your head, too. As you look at these numbers, don't let people being on the fence in your mind become a negative, because it truly isn't.
Thank you. Helpful point. Dave?
Dave? I wasn't going to say anything about the fence setters, but at any rate, I hear what you're saying, but maybe you can't get at or interpret it as a negative, but you can certainly interpret it as an uncertainty. And I wonder how our previous survey, 5 years ago, what did that look like in terms of the satisfaction numbers and the fence and the 50, the 50 people?
That was basically the same.
Yeah.
Those 52 to 51% on those on the fence were very, very close from 6 years ago.
That's interesting. One of the things that might tell you is that the quality of the rest of the data might really be suspect.
Well, I brought this book. I decided I was reading this book as I was doing this, which I'm not sure was a great idea. Humble Pie, When Math Goes Wrong in the Real World, which is a fascinating book of what happened, all the math that should be right, that things happen and it doesn't work. So, Dave, you would like this book. You probably know most of it. It's about 11:45. If there's one more question, but then I think we should.
I can't keep them out
Dave.
I was very involved with the survey and all back in 2016.
Right.
And one of the things that kind of really bothered me when Pastor Crick left was I went back to that survey again and all because I kept looking at that thing many times over the last few years, especially when I was involved on council. And there were so many things I saw in that first survey, and I just kept saying to myself, holy cow, we missed the boat on that, we dropped the ball on this, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, we forgot all about it. But then when I saw this new one, and the overall general results really made me feel good because there was another diagram, and it had us, and I forget what it all meant, but we were down a little bit further in the lower left there, and this time around, we're up further towards the right and all. So I felt pretty good about that because I think overall there were some things that, whether we were doing them on purpose or not, I think the church was moving in a nice direction. And one of the things that always annoyed me with Pastor Crick when we would have our little discussions, and he kept saying what somebody mentioned before, that I'm not here to grow the church. I don't think he meant it that way. I really think he meant it that, like that baseball field in Iowa, if we build it, they'll come. And I think that's what his focus, what he really meant to say. At least that's the way I always interpret it. But there were a lot of things in this new survey that I think showed that we were on a good track. And I don't remember any discussions in the first survey about being a pastor-driven or power-driven, whatever that was. What I remembered from the first survey that really stuck in my mind was when we talked to the president of Holy Cow, and we had about a 2.5-hour session with her. And at one point she said, you're a really diverse church in that half of you are home and hearth people and half of you are paracletes. And it's not a big majority. It's not like 70-30 or 75-25. It's like 55-45. And she said, that can be a real blessing, but it could be a real curse, too. But it's something you can work with, so I just had to I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I think that 2016 compared to now, yes, it's different with COVID. We went through all that. But I seem to think that when Pastor Rhodes left and we started to go through all this looking at ourselves and taking surveys and this, that, and the other thing, I just think compared that time compared to this time, despite COVID, I think the church is in a little better place. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. That's a nice note to end on, actually.
Dave was spot on about the 2016. I can tell you one thing that's drastically improved in this congregation. We talked about flexibility. The bar was like this. And this time, the bar was like this. So in terms of adaptability, the congregation expresses a willingness to look at things and to think about if changes need to occur. So,
Yes.
Dave's concept about that this was a good survey.
Excellent.
Steve
Okay.
Wilker said, don't worry about it. Don't do anything drastic.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending. We will be back at this. There'll be things that we'll be bringing up about how it can help us and what we can do. And so we'll be talking more about it at different times. And thank you for all your input. And this was very helpful. It was helpful to have everybody's comments. The handout, I don't know what, it was being printed. I don't know, maybe Steve, Paul, could you go in the back and see where the handout is? It's in your office. Okay, there it is. All right, it wasn't here for the beginning. Thank you.